and welcome back to BHookedCrochet.com. I'm your host Brittany, and in this tutorial I'm going to demonstrate how to crochet the inside out hat. This is a free pattern that's available at BHookedCrochet.com, and you can get the link to that pattern in the description below. Now this pattern is available in two different sizes, and we're going to be crocheting the newborn size in this tutorial. However, just know that if you're crocheting the larger size, the technique is going to be exactly the same. We're going to begin our hat by using the magic ring method. And if this is a method that you've tried and you've been unsuccessful with, then you can also do the alternate magic ring method. And you can find a tutorial on that at bhookedcrochet.com/alternative magic ring. So to begin the magic ring, I like to rest the yarn in between my second and third fingers, and I've got the tail end here. I'm just going to wrap that towards me and then just sort of lock this working yarn under those fingers and let it slide around. Then just hold on to that with your thumb. So now you're left with working yarn coming up from here, and then we have our tail out there. Now we're going to slip our hook underneath both of those loops and just grab that back loop and work it underneath that first loop. Now use your working yarn to create a chain. That's just going to lock it in place. It's actually not creating a chain. Now we're going to create one chain by doing that same method, just yarn over and pull through. Now we can just pinch off right here and then set this up so it's a little more comfortable for us to hold on to. Like I said, if you're not a fan of the magic ring, there are other ways you can start this hat. You can use that alternative method. You could even start with some chains too if you're more comfortable with that. So as you can see, I have my magic ring situated in my fingers. I have the tail end down here. I want to keep that in this position so that I can work over it, and I have my working yarn secured in my yarn hand. So we're just going to put our hook into that center ring, being sure to catch that tail under there, and then yarn over and pull up a loop. Now if we were doing a regular single crochet, we would yarn over and pull through two, but we're doing an extended. So what we're going to do is yarn over and just pull through one. And now we'll yarn over and pull through two. So that's all there is to the extended single crochet. There's really just one extra movement there. Now we want to have a total of 8 stitches, so we're going to go ahead and do that 7 more times. Now once you have your 8 stitches in your magic ring there, you'll just go ahead and take the tail and just pull it. That's going to fasten up the circle and pull everything together. And that has finished off the first round. So for this pattern, we're not going to be joining with the slip stitch, we're simply going to be working in a spiral. So to start off round 2, we just want to locate our first extended single crochet. We're going to ignore that chain 1 from the very beginning. We're not counting that as a stitch, so we just want to locate that first extended single crochet. You can see right here, or you can see the V right there. Insert your hook into that V, catch both of those loops, and work an extended single crochet. And since we're working in a spiral and we are working in the round, we need to keep track of our increases. And so I like to use a stitch marker to mark my very first stitch. Now I'm using clover locking stitch markers. I tend to like these because they don't fall out. But you can use anything that you have handy. A scrap piece of yarn or a bobby pin works just fine too. So for round 2, when you're working in the round, we're always going to make 2 stitches in every single stitch. That's going to make sure that we increase in the proper amount so that our piece stays flat and it works in a continuous circle. So we made our first extended single crochet in that first stitch. Now we just need to place our second in that same stitch. And then move on to the next stitch. Put 2 extended single crochets there. Find the next one and put 2 in that as well. And we're just going to repeat this until we reach our stitch marker. Once you reach your stitch marker, then you have finished round 2 and we're ready to move on to round 3. So for round 3, we're just going to continue in our typical increasing in the round fashion. But I am going to demonstrate how we're going to work around the stitch marker just in case this is a new concept to you. So this stitch marker marks the first stitch in the next round. So when I make my next stitch in this place right here, that is going to be my first stitch for round 3. So I'll just move that out of the way so I can work my extended single crochet in that stitch. And then be sure to place your stitch marker in the stitch that you just made. Now that's going to be your stopping point when you get to the other side. So round 3, the alternating pattern is 1 extended single crochet, 2 extended single crochet, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, and we're just going to alternate that all the way around. So our first stitch has 1 extended single crochet. That means our second stitch is going to have 2. And then our next stitch will have 1. And the next stitch 2. So just go ahead and repeat that until you've made it all the way around to your stitch marker. So when you've made it all the way around to the end of row 3, one really important thing to look for to make sure that you're increasing properly and you're maintaining your counts, your last stitch should have 2 extended single crochets. So we started with 1 in the first one, we'll end with 2 in that last one. And that's just going to make sure that we have that same pattern all the way around. It's just an easy visual cue so you don't have to count the stitches. Now the one thing I haven't mentioned yet is as we're working with our piece facing up in this direction, we're actually working on the wrong side of the work. So the extended single crochet looks pretty cool from this front side with a piece that's the part that's facing us as we're working our piece. But if you flip it over, it has a really cool texture on the wrong side, and that is actually going to be the right side of our hats. So yes, we are working this inside out. This is going to be what's on the outside of our hat. And while we're at this point, you can go ahead and flip your piece over so we have what's going to be our right side facing up, and we can just take care of this tail. So you'll just want to thread it on a darning needle. You can release your hook there, and I just like to work the tail underneath that first round of stitches, and I like to try to go at least 1 full time around. If you can do 2, or if you feel like you need to do more, then it's just going to make your closure extra secure. Then once you get it worked under, then you can safely just trim that off. And now we're ready to begin round 4. So as we begin round 4, there's nothing new here. We're just going to continue increasing in the round, and I'm going to release my stitch marker so I can make my first stitch in round 4 in that space. And then place your stitch marker again in that new stitch that you created. Now this time we're going to increase every 2, and when I say increase every 2, the increase is where we have 2 stitches in one. That's considered a crochet increase. So when you hear somebody say we're going to increase every 2 stitches, then that means we're going to increase every 2 stitches. So we'll put 1 extended single crochet, 1 extended single crochet, that's your 2, and then you'll put your increase in the next one, 2 extended single crochets. So here we have our first extended single crochet in the first stitch. So we just want to make another extended single crochet in the next stitch. So again, this is our second. So what does that mean? That means we're going to increase in the next stitch. So we're increasing every 2 stitches in round 4. Now do your extended single crochet in the next 2. And then 2 extended single crochets in the next, or simply increase in your next stitch. And that's the sequence that we're going to repeat all the way around row 4. So once again, when you've reached the end of the round, you want to make sure that you have 2 extended single crochets in your very last stitch. It's going to make sure that we have our stitch count correctly and that we have been increasing in the proper place. So again, visual cue, make sure you have 2 single or extended single crochets in that last stitch. So for the size that we're working on in this tutorial, the last round that we're going to cover is round 5 as far as the increasing goes. But if you're working one of the other sizes that's available for this pattern, you're going to be working the technique in the same way as we've been doing here. The only difference that you're going to experience is the number of stitches in between your increases. So you'll just follow along with the written instructions. If, say, you're making an adult size, then you'll just follow along, and once you reach the last round of increasing, then that's where we'll pick up in the next section of the tutorial. But now, covering round 5, I've released my stitch marker. I'm going to make one extended single crochet in that first stitch, and this time we're going to increase every 3 stitches. So are you seeing the pattern here? We just increase the number of stitches in between our increases by 1 every round, and that's always the case when we're crocheting in the round. That's sort of the magic of how these things come together, is just to make sure that we're increasing proportionally. That way our piece continues to be a circle. So we've made our first stitch, and we just want to do an extended single crochet in the next 2. Okay, so that is going to be our 3 stitches in between our increase. So this is the third one. Now that means I'm going to increase in the next stitch, or in other words, put 2 extended single crochets in the same stitch. Now do an extended single crochet in each of the next 3. And now increase in your next. So that is our repeat for round 5. Go ahead and finish up round 5, and then we'll talk about what to do next. So once you've reached the end of round 5, again, just double check, make sure you have 2 extended single crochets in your last stitch. And then we're ready to move on to round 6. And again, for this size that we're working on, rounds 6 through 12 are going to be exactly the same. If you're working one of the different sizes, what you want to do at this point is work until you get to the point where we are no longer increasing. So if you're working on the same size as me, what we want to do at this point is work rounds 6 through 12 exactly the same. And it's really simple. We still want to use our stitch marker, so we can just keep track of each of our rounds. So we'll just remove that, make an extended single crochet in our first stitch, and all we're going to do for rounds 6 through 12 is make one extended single crochet into every single stitch. So after a couple of rounds, you'll start to see the hat take shape. It's going to start curling downwards, and that's normal. Like I said, it's normal for it to take a couple of rounds because we're working with a shorter stitch, so it's going to take it just a little bit longer to catch up. So you won't really notice it start taking shape until about row 8 or so, and that's completely normal. So go ahead and pause your video. Work rounds 6 through 12 in the same way, keeping track of your rounds by continuing to use your stitch marker, and then come back to the video and we'll talk about what to do next. So if you're working on the newborn size hat like I am, once you get to the end of round 12, your little hat should look something like this. Now as you've been working, this is the front side of the stitch, and what's out here is the back side of the stitch. So that's why this is called an inside out hat. So as it started to curl, it probably naturally wanted to curl in this direction here, and then we were working along in this direction. So if that's the case, if you've been working that way, just go ahead and flip it so that the back side of our stitches are what's facing outward. So I'm at the very end of round 12, And I'm just going to release this stitch marker because we're going to transition to a new color yarn. But before we do that, we have to account for some of this height difference. So whenever you work in a spiral fashion, you're always going to have one side of your work higher than the other. And one way to sort of get rid of that is just to taper it downward. And we're just going to do that by making a slip stitch in that very next stitch. And then I'll make a slip stitch in that second stitch. And now you can see from here, we've just made a nice little curve downward. So now we can go ahead and bind off. You can just pull that loop upward. And now we're ready to begin round 13 using our second color. So to fasten on our next color, we need to get our hat situated so that we have the top up here, and this is where I did my bind off. So just find that stitch that's right next to your bind off and just go ahead and stick your hook in that stitch, and then make your slip knot with your new color. Place that loop on your hook and then pull it through. Now, one little tip to avoid weaving in a bunch of ends, you can work over these tails as you're working this first round. If you're uncomfortable doing that, however, you can just go ahead and weave them in at the end. So the next different kind of stitch that we're going to be working with in this hat is the half double crochet in the back bar only. And that's going to create a really unique, almost knit-like ribbing. And so that's going to be the bands of our hat. So to do that, we want to start off with a chain 1. And we're going to continue working in a spiral fashion. And we're just going to locate the very next stitch and make a half double crochet. So wrap that yarn, insert it into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop and yarn over, and pull through all 3. Now the back bar that we're talking about will cover after we get through this first round. For now, what we want to do is just make one solid round of half double crochets. Now once you've made it all the way around, we're ready to start working in that back bar and creating our pretty cool and unique texture here. So the back bar is located at the back of the stitch. So if you're looking at it from this direction, this is what the front side of a half double crochet looks like. But when you rotate your work and look at the back side, you see another bar back there. So we have our typical V right here on top, and then rotate a little bit further, and it's like, hey, we have another little V that we can work into. So we're just going to be working into that back bar as we work these stitches. So this was where we started. This was our chain 1. We're just going to ignore this. We're going to rotate our work forward, find our first stitch, which is right here, and then locate that back bar, which you can see right here. And then you just want to half double crochet into that back bar only. And what you'll see is that is going to pull that top V, what we would normally work into as a stitch, it's going to pull that forward, and that's what gives it that knit-like appearance. So we'll just locate the next back bar and half double crochet there. And the next one, and that's our repeat. We're just going to half double crochet in the back bar only And we're not necessarily doing this for a certain number of rounds. We're just going to measure. So we don't have to use our stitch markers to keep track of which round we're on anymore. We're just simply going to half double crochet until our band measures about 2 inches long. And there you can see how the V's just sort of stick together there and create that cool texture. So again, if you're working on this newborn size as I am, you're going to continue this stitch pattern until your band measures about 2 inches. But if you're working on one of the other sizes, you just want to follow what the written instructions say. This band is a pretty significant portion of the design, so we're going to be working this quite a bit. And as you can see, we're shortening our rows as we're rotating that row forward. And so you just want to follow along with the written instructions, so you make sure you're making your band as long as the pattern calls for. Okay, so when your band measures, at least for this size, about 2 inches, you'll want to stop somewhere around where you started. So since we weren't actually keeping track of the rounds with our stitch marker, you can just eyeball it here. And there's just one last thing that we need to do in order to finish things up. So you can see that we have this last row of half double crochet, and it kind of throws off our pattern. And what we want to do is just make a slip stitch into the back bar only of every single stitch, and that's going to pull the stitch forward to maintain the pattern, but it's not going to add any extra height like we have here. So we should just end up with a nice clean finished edge that matches the rest of our stitch pattern. Now as you're doing this, you'll want to make sure that you're making your slip stitches relatively loose. Since this is the last part of our hat, we still want it to be stretchy at the very bottom of the band. That way it can stretch to fit on the recipient's head. So making your slip stitches a little looser than normal is definitely going to serve you well here. Now once you've made it all the way around, you'll really be able to tell because you'll no longer have that back bar to work into. So once you've made your last slip stitch, just go ahead and fasten off and pull that loop, or just pull that loop up, and now we can weave in this tail. Now I like to do so on the inside, and so I'll have these tails from my color transition and this last one. Now it's always helpful to run these tails just along a nice long row of stitches. And it really helps to secure things if you're kind of sloppy about it. So as you can see, I'm not catching the full loop. I'm actually going inside some of the yarn and then looping back the other way. And when you do this, it just really helps to secure things. And then you'll just repeat that for these two tails if you are not working over them. So this finishes up our tutorial on this tiny little inside out hat. Again, you can find the full pattern and written instructions for the other sizes available at bhookedcrochet.com/inside out hat. On behalf of BHookedCrochet.com, I'm your host, Brittany. We'll see you in the next tutorial at BHookedCrochet.com.